You are listening to Art Destinations, a podcast where we host fortnightly conversations with artists and thinkers living and or working on islands to see how these unique places shape imaginations. This season is set in Tasmania, following on from our Venice series. Hello, my name is Sarah Rhodes, an artist based in Lutruwita, Tasmania. In this episode, we are in conversation with Lisa Garland, a photographic artist who has been documenting her community on the northwest coast for more than 20 years. Lisa makes portraits of people so deeply connected to where they live that often the portrait of their place tells more about them than the people themselves. As a new generation is emerging and another passing, Lisa reflects on what she looks for in her subjects and how her focus is changing. Lisa Garland is represented by Despard Gallery Hobart, and you can see Lisa's work on our Instagram page, artdestinations.podcast. Subscribe to Art Destinations on your hosting platform so you don't miss an episode, and even leave a review. Your contribution supports us. Welcome, Lisa, to Art Destinations Tasmania. It's great to have you here.
Woohoo! It's good to be here. Excellent.
So we're here to talk a little bit about your photography practice. Mm-hmm. And when did you first find photography?
So year 12 at Hellyer College in Burnie. So that's where documentary photography kind of started. I was spending a lot of time with my brother at the time because I didn't have a license. And so he would be travelling around in a Land Cruiser and so forth and delivering fish. And I remember my teacher at the time, Michelle Round, set an assignment which was to document a space. And so Craig just happened to have to call into the Kui Wreckers to get some Land Cruiser parts. And I had the camera with me and I just started documenting that space. And there was a little old man that lived at the back of that workshop. And I could see him in and out of the car wrecks. And I was actually a pretty reserved kind of person then. I knew I had to take that photograph and I had to summon all this bravery within me to approach this person. Yeah, that was the first photograph that really made a lot of change. I mean, I didn't realise, well, you don't, that it was a beautiful or a lovely photograph until I went back to school and developed it in the darkroom. My teacher was really excited. And so I gather, just like any walk, whether it's sport or so forth, when someone gives you encouragement and is really excited about something, it instills something in you. And so it was like, oh, maybe I'm okay at this kind of thing. So that was it. And I still have that negative because I'm a bit of a hoarder. So I love that I still have that first portrait that I took at 17.
That's special. It's nice to be able to take good quality pictures at that age.
And I think maybe film, we stored them really well. We had neg sleeves and so forth. And maybe it would have been very different if it probably had been digital. I might have lost that file, in some hard drive that probably crashed. But yeah, having that negative and it still being there, yeah, it's pretty special to me.
Okay. So I was reading somewhere that one of your first early pictures was a picture of your father lying on the beach, and it is quite a special picture. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about, the early works that you were making, like from after that picture in the wreckers?
So I actually didn't continue portraiture for a while. I went to art school and actually started photographing pinhole. So that's when I bought myself a 5x4 camera because I was making my own lenses to open that infinite depth of field and play with my f-stop. So I was still coming home every holidays, but I was mostly documenting monuments in the landscape, so ruins and these kinds of things, because I wanted that pinhole technique with a long exposure. And then when I came back to the northwest coast to live, my first job was a photographer for a newspaper. So when you're working with cameras every day, I didn't take a lot of photographs for years or 7 years because working for a newspaper, sometimes the soul's kind of ripped out of the art content. And so then a group of artists were living on the Northwest Coast, and he applied for an exhibition to have in Hobart and titled it Microcosm. So I started kind of unravelling my microcosm, and so that's when I started thinking about my family, and I bought lenses for that camera. And yeah, so with Dad, my dad was a massive sunbaker, as in, you know, he would spend hours laying on the beach with, in his boot, he had like a little clock, so he had the time. He had a solution of brown vinegar with baby oil that he'd put over his body. He was unique. He didn't really care what people thought of him. He would do what he wanted to do. And yeah, so I just looked one day and went, gee, Dad looks pretty cool laying there. So I took that photograph. He was not very happy about it, but now that I love that I have that photograph and that negative of Dad doing his day-to-day ritual in summer. So it's, yeah, I love it as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cute. So did you continue photographing your family from then? Because you said you were working on the microcosm idea.
Yeah, so from that show, which was at the Carnegie, I took 5 portraits, only like of my father's friends and so forth, because when I was young, I did spend a lot of time cruising around with him in the car. So I kind of revisited in my head Dad's buddies, and he would then drive me to those places, and I took a series of 5 photographs. And I gather bringing that work out of the Northwest Coast and then to Hobart, we got a lot of positive kind of feedback about the work, not just mine, but the painters amongst us as well. And so I continued then photographing family, you know, my uncles and my auntie. My dad's from a family of 12, so it wasn't foreign to go to my auntie's house and maybe 6 of my aunties and uncles would be sitting around a kitchen table having cups of tea and just talking about life for hours. Yep, so that's how it evolved, and I kept doing that for quite some years.
So was that the moment that you realised that the Northwest Coast was particularly different from Hobart?
Yeah, I think with my walk and my upbringing, there was a really beautiful honesty and genuine element to life, and also a simplicity of slowing down and just those rituals of, like I said, sitting around the table with a cup of tea. And if you could do that for 3 hours, then you would. You know, a lot of my aunties and uncles weren't working. Maybe they were working on fishing boats or chopping wood and this kind of thing. So they had time on their side to share a yarn and just be. Yeah, so that's how it became.
Right. So you really grew up in an environment where the people were touching on the sort of quintessential Tasmanian way of being, really, in terms of chopping the wood and
For
fishing.
sure. Yeah. So my uncle Peter at 13, you know, he left school and went and lived up the back of Wynyard at Preolina, chopping wood all week. You know, he lived in a hut. My dad worked on cooter boats, as well as my Uncle Max. You know, when they were not at sea, they'd be slinging nets in a shed next to the Wynyard Wharf, sitting on stools, sitting around a little fire. Yeah, just being and just living in the moment. There wasn't any talk about future or past. It was that day and what was happening right then and there. Yeah, it was kind of the rum, and I'm not saying they were battlers at all, but it was very seasonal, a seasonal lifestyle, maybe picking up spuds when that was happening. Yeah, just being.
Right, it's a really lovely sort of way of mindfulness, a lovely mindful way of being.
You know, I look at my life, you know, I'm a teacher, a full-time teacher, and gee, those times where I get to stop and maybe have a cup of tea sitting in the backyard are not very often, whereas they could do that. Because my life was busy, I started to recognise the importance of that lifestyle and documenting it. I didn't think even at the time that maybe life would get busier and that would be something that was unique, but it was. And that's changing. You know, my auntie and uncles have all passed away. There's one remaining now, Uncle Koki. So it's gone that kind of generational storytelling and stopping.
That was my next question, actually. To what extent is that sort of still life a generational thing? I mean, do you have cousins or siblings who are still in that same way?
Not like that, no. Gee, you know, they didn't have phones, for example. You know, it was completely different. You used your spare time to make, like I said, slinging nets, whittling, tanning, skins. So you kept busy in that kind of context, whereas now it's completely different.
Yeah. In terms of, you know, you would have photographed your family, but then your subjects are not only your friends and family. It extended out, and you've sort of documented this world.
Yeah, I gather that's the importance of things like residencies and so forth. So, you know, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to places like Queenstown and recently King Island, and so that's golden to be able to go to a new place and just that sense of discovery. And I think maybe there's something in me that I warm to certain people, you know. So I know when I rocked up to Queenstown, you would notice things like a certain garden or the outside of a house which kind of spoke to me and maybe unravelled kind of my own upbringing. I have discovered a lot of beautiful people in a variety of spaces. Yeah.
So you wouldn't only be finding microcosms on residencies though? Like when you're at home, you would have photographed most of the people in your sort of web, I guess, you know, related from... Is that how you're finding people? You're going from one person's introducing you to another?
Yeah, often an auntie or an uncle or one of my dad or brother's friends will say, oh, Lisa, you really should be photographing Steve who lives here and he's bottling possum tails. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, that sounds awesome. There would be a chain of characters that evolve from one from the other. So, yep.
So I'm guessing based on that you would have sort of intense periods of photographing where you have quite a few leads and then there'd be a gap.
Yeah.
Is that how it works in terms of the rhythm?
Totally, and it can be pretty emotional. So sometimes I kind of need to have a bit of a break as well. There's a lot more that goes on than taking a photograph. You know, I'm meeting, in some cases, people for the first time and hearing stories. And sometimes life's pretty hard. So it can be so much more than a photograph. And I gather that's why, you know, photographers or artists will go into the world of video and text because there's so much more to say. And I've certainly had moments like that.
Okay. So what is the process when you meet someone? Are you going there repeatedly or just...
If it's someone new to me, I might not even photograph the first day I go there. It will be simply kind of talking to this person and introducing myself and what I do and explaining, you know, really I'm a documentary photographer and it's the find, it's the fact that you have created this really great space and you're really interesting. And so these people become lifetime friends. You know, I've photographed some people up to 10 to 15 times where I've revisited, and I have sheets and sheets of film on that person. And also it's because I want to do that, and I genuinely like being in people's worlds, and I gain a lot from that by giving me a moment. I get to tap out of my life for a day, jump in the car, drive, 2.5 hours to the West Coast, sit in a lounge room for the day with multiple cups of tea and just talking about life and what that person's making, and they're showing me things. It's not just documenting something, it's also something that feeds my soul as a person as well, and reminding me about the beautiful simplicity of life and relishing in that, because wow, life can get pretty busy.
So I'm sure you've heard some quite amazing stories, and a photograph does tell a lot, but it doesn't tell everything. And there's a lot of things that you would hear that are completely private between you and them. But have you considered using that information in other ways?
Yeah, I have thought about that. And so sometimes using text, I have had exhibitions where I've written small pieces of writing to go with each print. But I don't know if that's probably for the viewer, if it's needed. Maybe that's more something that is between me and the sitter as well. And, I journal all the time. So maybe they are private kind of elements that I need, and for my art practice they keep me going because they are the golden things. I mean, the image is golden in also a public context, but I think to drive me as an artist and to keep me doing what I'm doing, they are the golden bits where I sit in my car after I've photographed someone and go, wow. Sometimes I've had moments where I've sat in my car and I can't stop crying because, someone's genuine love they've described for their partner that's passed away. Those kinds of stories are fantastic, and hopefully they do good for who I am as a person and moving forward in my own life. They're lessons.
Yeah, and also it's a special moment for them to be able to share it. It would feel good for them.
Yeah, and I think I have to honour that, and I have to, if I was to add text, frequently, it would be something that I would definitely have to make sure that it's done correctly and right. And yeah, so I don't know. I think maybe that's between myself and my friends.
No, I think that's nice. Your pictures, by nature, they're highly detailed. These people's homes or their sheds or gardens are very rich in visual material, and so there's a lot to look at. So to what extent are you organising or moving things around to get the composition right?
Yeah, I don't move anything. I think when I enter a space, we all would know this, that you totally get an understanding of where someone sits within that space, and how they surround themselves with their objects. They're paintings or artworks in themselves. So I don't dictate a thing. When we sit, the sitter will sit where they would normally be. And so it's really documenting that world. Maybe also the art we create becomes a reflection of who we are as well. I surround myself with things that are nostalgic to me. My space at home is full of stories from my own life, hence me having the negative that I took when I was 17. So I respond to people that are on a similar walk. So I totally believe that. I'm who I am based on my upbringing. My mum and dad were miles apart in reference to their philosophy. And so I think I have a little bit of both of them in me. I'm not indifferent to the people I photograph.
Okay, that's nice. The picture of Kim, the priest, where everything is so neat and ordered and everything is in place. Obviously people would tidy up to a certain extent before you come. Not everybody, but generally. But like all the lines are perfect. Is that just his personality?
Yeah, that's Kim. Yeah, totally. I've known Kim for probably 20 years now, and so I visited Kim, over and over again, and that space has changed and evolved. Kim's now living in the family home, but that family home is no different to the shed Kim was living in. That's Kim. Kim is ordered. He likes things lined up. That's his character. And so, yeah, the spaces we create is just an extension of who we are. So I just happened to meet Kim and he had a golden space. The tool of my trade is to document that space. And so finding golden, Kim to Marlene in Queenstown, where you open that front door and you're just like, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. It's just so brilliant. Shane on King Island with shells, making shell strings all filled in one room. Man, you just walk in and it's just like a visual paradise. You know it instantly. You're just like, wow, this is fantastic.
And was there a man with a stick museum?
Yeah, Mr. Oddity, which was at Boat Harbour, which is near where I grew up, near Wynyard. And so, yeah, that's right. Just stopping the car and going into those unusual spaces and you go, wow, this man's collected hundreds of sticks that just speak to him and he's put them on the wall and he looked like a little stick himself. It's great.
I was looking at your work and you've got a beautiful picture of Leo Kelly's house. And Leo Kelly was an artist, astrologer, man of the church, and he lived in Queenstown and he lived in this sort of corrugated iron home that is like a collection of extensions almost. And he had this stargazing or observatory at the top. And has that been pulled down now?
I think it has.
It's about to be pulled down if it hasn't already been pulled down, because it's been sold after he passed away. Now, it sort of made me think how much Tasmania has changed while you've been photographing over the last 20 or 30 years. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. I'll do the odd portrait, but not to the degree I used to. So, I was photographing people all the time, whereas now I've kind of shifted and moved into symbolic spaces a little bit as well that have the mark of time's gone. I don't know, maybe a cross in the landscape or someone's moved rocks in a certain form. And again, maybe that's that nostalgic kind of thing, like the wood pile in a certain shape. It's still an extension of a person, but the ramen that I respond to has changed, and also that brings a bit of sadness. I've lost a lot of friends as well that have passed away that I've photographed. I've photographed my neighbour when I was a child probably, 40 times, and Peter's not with us anymore. And Fred, who lived at the Don, I'd just phone and go, Fred, I'm coming around. I wouldn't mind documenting your kitchen wall. He'd be like, that's fine, Lisa, I'll be home tomorrow. And the same with Peter, who was living down at Britton Swamp. And maybe I need some time just to be with that a little bit as well, because it's all happened in the last few years. So I don't know what will come out of that. I work with teenagers. I find they are really interesting as well in reference to transitioning into spaces, and also, the spaces they make that they're not putting a lot of thought into it. It's just being. So I have documented some of the students that I teach over the time. I'm not sure if I'll extend that, but yeah, I don't know.
I was just wondering, because on the northwest coast, in some ways, the changes that we see, like in Launceston, for the first, like up until recently, it hadn't changed. You kind of make a joke that you could look at a YouTube video of the 1950s. They have these videos of past, and the town hasn't changed. But until about, 5 years ago, it did start to change.
Yeah.
But maybe on the northwest coast it hasn't quite started to change yet.
It is, particularly, there's housing concerns and so forth, but gone are the plot in the middle of town that had a little shanty on it. They're gone now and filled up with units, and I understand that's a need. But in reference to my art practice, it is changing. And maybe that's why I'm pulling myself more to the West Coast, and maybe, also going to places like King Island and finding those beautiful little dwellings. I don't know where it'll lead me, but I've been photographing the kelp gatherers, people that are still working on the land, but that's changing as well. Recently, I'd photographed the kelp farm or factory near Arthur River, but I noticed, the tea tree framework's gone now and it's been transformed using metal. So aesthetically, that's kind of changed for me as a photographer. I really like the handmade and man's touch on those things. So things are evolving. Maybe there'll be something interesting that comes out of me and where my head leads with that kind of thing as well. Don't know.
I was just thinking, it's quite interesting because, we do become our parents. So while that generation is passing, the young people are getting older and they end up kind of taking on that life that they had before. So, just in terms of the whittling and the handcraft and,
That's
look at young people and they're not really doing that. But then if they see their older people doing it, maybe they do pick it up later.
Yeah, I think young people are because they're so consumed with computers and their phones and so forth. I think once they're introduced to the handmade, like lino cutting or weaving, jewelry making, I really think they're responding really well to that, and they want to physically make because it's something that's probably been missing from their life. Tanning. There is a therapy in sitting in a chair, knitting, and what you gain from that. So, I think there is a place for the maker in our soul.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm quite big on that myself.
Cool.
So you quoted Max de Payne in an article saying photography must do more than entertain, it must incite thought. So what are you trying to say through your pictures?
Yeah, I want to celebrate the genuine and the honest and the real. I really do. I'm not interested in fame or I don't know what the word is, but I respond well to the humble. Yeah, I love people that have time to have a yarn and just be, that's what I'm about.
Okay, sharing the honest stories, the human condition.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, I think everything gets so polished, doesn't it? So it's actually hard to find.
The raw.
Yeah.
And not scared to speak out about something. There are lessons in life stories and the importance of sharing them. It's paramount to move forward, and particularly for younger people, we all muck up. That's how it goes. But we have to rise again and keep going. Life's a lesson. And so stopping and listening to people that have lived a life, I think that's really important, that we learn from that.
Yeah, just going back actually in terms of the stories that you're listening to but you're not sharing because it's an image. When you have a really strong connection with someone, while you don't actually know what that story is, you can feel it.
Yeah, you can. Yep.
Whereas if you didn't know those stories, if that person didn't share those, there would be probably a barrier. Like you wouldn't actually have the depth of emotion in the picture. So I was just sort of circling back and thinking about that.
Yeah, people have said that, and I think that's because, well, there may be people start off as strangers, but there's certainly that changes and evolves. They become friends, and so maybe that does come out in the photograph. But also, I was saying before, I think the people that I photograph in the spaces are reflection of my life and my upbringing. So I think based on my upbringing, that's just what I warm to and what I am drawn to.
Just one last question. On the West Coast, you really enjoy the isolation and the weather. You can't escape the weather on the West Coast. What is it, do you think, that you find comfort in there?
Growing up, my brother would be pretty light on for deckhands. And so, I'd have to get up pretty early, 5 o'clock in the morning, and help him pull nets. And so, being out on that ocean in all types of weather, maybe it had an impact, and it's something I embrace. And I think different weather from those experiences brings a different energy, the walking in the rain, the wind, and so forth. So that's just how I was brought up. And so it's also innately and something not to sit indoors from, but actually throw yourself out amongst it. I mean, Craig had to, because you had to get those nets in and so forth. And at the time it probably wasn't that enjoyable, but on reflection, there are times you remember and it just clicks with you. And so, spending time down there walking on those wild beaches where no one's around and there's not even a footprint, you're lost in your own thought. My life is really busy. I work, every day with teenagers, a classroom, a class after class of 28 students, tapping out from noise, different souls. I mean, they're great, and when I'm in it, it's awesome, but I think I need to have the opposite of that as well, and that's what those spaces bring.
Okay, that's a good answer. Thank you very much, Lisa, for coming along. That was really interesting.
Thanks for having me. It was good.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Art Destinations Tasmania. Be reminded about our next episode by subscribing to our fortnightly newsletter on our website artdestinations.org. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes. Ciao for now.